All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. As you can see, I have a new guest today, and it's a guest that I've heard speak in discussions before, but it is the first time we've spoken together. So I'd love it if you welcomed this lovely lady, Madison, if you'd introduce yourself and where people can
Thank you so much for having me. So maybe I should be embarrassed, but I'm not. I invited myself here tonight.
Only a little bit.
I finished reading Realm of the Elderlings just a couple of weeks ago. And ever since then, I have had this overwhelming need to talk about it. And we've had some good Discord discussions with some other friends and just in other channels. But typing it out is not the same as just sitting in a living room with somebody and being like, I need to talk about this. So thank you so much for having me on. I need this. It's therapy for me.
You are more than welcome. As any of my guests can tell you, I love gushing about this series so much that having new people on to gush with is a joy. So welcome. And
thank you.
As ever, any conversations once we've begun, leave you kind of an open door to come back at any point if you have further thoughts.
Okay.
Because I imagine that most channels people get sick when you talk about the same author too much, but I've kind of made that my thing, so
I like it. And I mean, it is so, it is so you at this point. Like every time I see a live stream, I know Derry's on there, I'm like, oh, we are talking Realm of the Elderlings. And I think it's good to have a niche. It's good to have a thing for sure.
Well, it's like, okay, people know that I have this, and if then they go, oh, she also knows about these things, that's fine. But if all they want is Hobb content, I'm your lady.
And you could talk about it for the rest of your life and never unpack all of it. So many conversations to have.
I'm still learning, and new readers bring me a lot of knowledge where I've realized that I've stuck myself in a rut and I haven't taken in anything new on that subject for a while, and it just kind of refreshes my own thinking on it, which is
love. Yeah, I love that. Yep. Yeah. And I am a rereader. I love to reread favorite things. Yeah. And I'm telling you, I was not very far into this at all when I knew this will be something I continue to read for the rest of my life. So I mean, how exciting is that to have something that you know you're going to love forever? Like that's
it's one thing awesome to find a book that's really good and holds up to rereading. It's quite another to find a book that you actually love, that you want to reread, that you want to go back and visit just because you miss the characters. It's not because, oh, it's a really good story and I'll have a good time. It's like, no, I actually want to go and just hang out with Fitz.
I miss them. I miss my people, and I miss that world. It feels like going home. Like, right. So again, I said I just finished the series a couple of weeks ago, but a big rush of new people are starting Live Ship Traders and a Discord channel that I moderate. Yay. And I have not started a Live Ship Traders reread officially, but I got my books out and put them on my bedside table, and I've been doing a lot of spot reading, and it's just delicious because they'll say, okay, you know, Ship of Magic chapter 8, and I'm going, I don't remember what chapter 8 is. So I open it up and I'm like, okay, well, I might as well read it since I'm here.
Yeah, I'm here.
So I've already started dabbling in my bits of rereads.
Yes, I have to, but a few of the books I do have the chapter numbers down because that's the big chapters. And it kind of helps that it's usually chapter 26. So it's like, okay.
Oh, is that book are we talking? Do I need to go back and like bookmark all the chapter 26s? I
don't think so, but the two that get the most
magic
reactions are in Fool's Errand toward the end, and you'll know what I'm referring to, and Ship of Destiny is the big controversial chapter. So and both of them are chapter 26. So the minute I start seeing people in Discord getting into the 20s, I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, here we go. Everybody buckle up.
Yeah. Ready for the for the reactions. So it's yes, it's a thing. So on that note, how did you find the Farseer world? Did you hear about it in the book world and thought I'll get there eventually, or was Hobb on your radar for a long time? Or?
Yeah, so I have been reading fantasy since I was a kid, but basically just checked off your basic, you know, Chronicles of Narnia, Lord of the Rings, those things. Then took a super long hiatus from reading just because, you know, high school, college, married life, having kids, it wasn't my main hobby for a really long time. And then in summer of 2019, I was like, I'm going back to books because like my mom's an avid reader. I was raised to read and I just really missed it because I mean, there's something to say about like a really well-made TV show or a movie, but it's just not the same. Like you can do so much more with a book than you can with a visual medium.
Yeah.
And so I was really craving like getting back into that. And I knew fantasy was going to be my niche because it's just how I'm wired. Yeah. So I wanted to build up a library because when I do anything, I kind of like to go big. So I did a lot of used book shopping and I went to this one used bookstore all the time to see what kind of new things they were getting. And she keeps a ton of stuff outside and it's free. It's literally like, it's either because they have too many copies of it or it's like somewhat damaged or, whatever, or a lot of library copies and stuff like that. And they encourage that you leave a little donation or whatever. But basically it's just like, take it, get it out of here. Yeah. And they had the full set of Farseer.
Oh my God.
Mass market paperback. Yeah, mass market paperback. And they were really yellowed and stuff, but otherwise they were in perfect condition. And so I was like, I'll take these. And I didn't know anything about them. Yes, they look like that.
Yay. My original ones
I no longer have them, but
in pretty,
yeah.
I read them a lot. So
yeah. So, and I just knew that it was a full set, and it was something I had heard of. Like I didn't know anything about it, but it was an author name that I knew was legit. And it was a property that I have heard of before. And so I was like, why not? Because at this point, I'm trying to beef up my library. Yeah. And then I got more involved in like the booktube community and on Discord and stuff. And I met my friend Scot, who is the bald booktuber.
Oh, yes.
And he loves it. He loves Realm of the Elderlings. And so he, at that point, I think he had only read Farseer, but he had made it his a point that year to reread Farseer and do all of the Realm of the Elderlings. And so when he kind of started like getting people geared up for that, I was like, I think I actually own those books. So it kind of turned into I don't have any big reason to read it other than the fact that this guy likes it. There's a read along happening and I already own the books. There's no reason not to. Yeah. And so it was just kind of one of those, everything fell into place. I think I'll give it a shot. And all I knew about it going into it was that it will be a heavy emotional ride and that don't let the title trick you. It's really not a book about an assassin. Yeah. And it sounds like it's going to be like an adventure story or something like really dark and stabby
and training montage.
Yeah. So that's kind of where I came from. And I didn't have a lot invested. And I just thought, what the heck, why not? And like the rest is history. Like I liked Farseer a lot. Yep. And I'm kind of so I loved Assassin's Apprentice because book ones, I'm a sucker for a good book one. I love beginnings. Yeah. I love coming of age. And I love that, that classic fantasy setup of it's an orphan or a bastard or some kind of castaway son that's being raised in a non-traditional way, like kind of Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn does it as well, and it's just a classic fantasy trope that I happen to love. So I really liked Assassin's Apprentice. I'm an odd one out where Royal Assassin, I felt like kind of middling on it, so I'm definitely excited to reread that now with all the perspective that I have. Yeah. I'm very excited to reread that because I didn't dislike it, but I'm the weird one though. I love Assassin's Quest. That sealed the deal for me. And I know that's controversial.
I would have told you then that you will love the entire series. That's the book. And
it's like, I hate to be that person that tells, but I am now. I tell people, if you struggled with Assassin's Quest, don't let it bog you down because it will be so different in retrospect. Like once you finish Fool's Fate and then once you finish Assassin's Fate, those two books change everything. And make it so magical. So I was lucky though because I happen to absolutely adore Assassin's Quest. And again, I think it was just, I picked it up a couple months later and I think the mood was just perfect for it. It was in winter and it's a very winter book. Yes. And I love fantasy books where they're walking and trying to stay alive and hunting and gathering, herbs. I like the process of the traveling in fantasy books. And there is a lot of that, which I know is a big complaint, but more than anything, it's the book to me where I really fell in love with The Fool.
Yep.
Obviously, I think it's The Fool's first big book.
Yes.
And then Kettricken is
Queen.
Everything. She is forever my queen. She's the ultimate queen. And I liked her in every book previous to it. But in that book, I was like, no, she is my queen. All the French kisses, Kettricken. So as much as I love me some Night Eyes and Fitz and, Verity and all, I love everything about that book. But man, those two characters stole the show for me and made it, it's one of my favorites.
Yeah. Oh, that pleases me so much because of all of Farseer, that's the one that gets it's my that's favorite. The one that people go, oh, it's so long, it's so boring. And I have to sort of remind myself, if they haven't emotionally connected with Fitz, yes, it's going to be long.
Yeah. Well, and it is, and we're doing full spoiler, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I think once you're getting the whole ending. And one thing I will say that I don't disagree with when people have this complaint is that the ending feels rushed.
Yes.
And I'm like, I see what you're saying and you're not wrong. But keep in mind, you're only getting Fitz's perspective.
Yes, that's right.
And when the action really starts happening,
he's not there.
It's Starling and Kettricken on the back of the dragon.
Yeah.
And Fitz is left behind. So all the action, all the payoff is technically happening off screen.
Yeah.
And once you get through specifically Fool's Fate and Assassin's Fate, you really get Verity's perspective.
Yeah. You're getting that.
Yeah. It switches everything. And Fitz is finally understanding, oh, this is what it was like for Verity. Yeah. Because during the end of Assassin's Quest, he logically understands the basics of what's happening with Verity and why he's not connecting with him.
Yeah.
But he's also having to watch Kettricken go through this confusion and heartbreak. He's dealing with Starling. He's dealing with the Fool, who's got his own crazy thing going on the side. And he's also grieving Molly and Burrick. He's thinking about himself. He's grieving the loss of his identity. Like he is no longer Fitz Farseer.
Yeah, he's is literally dead to everybody.
So he's literally so intrinsic this whole time because he's like, there's a lot. He respects what Verity's going through, but he's still his own person. And so he's thinking about all these other things. And so it makes sense to me why it doesn't hit for everybody. But I'm like, when you finish it all out and you get the disconnect happening from his perspective, oh my God. Like I'm going to get chills just thinking about it. Like I've said this over and over again, but I don't think I've never read anything that had so much satisfying and full circle payoff.
Oh,
I've never read another series that does it that well, ever. Ever.
I think what struck me really early on, after I probably only read the entire series right through till Assassin's Fate, it struck me how cleverly written it was, and that it shows you that you have to constantly reassess your world, because Fitz is having to, and put things into context. Yes, you were really angry about that when you were young, but you didn't have context. Now that you do have context, can you forgive those people? Can you find the grace in yourself to see what they were going through? Because now you've experienced what they were going through, and it reframes a lot of things in your inner life. And I think that's an important thing to sort of take away from anything is learn as you go, but pay attention to what you're learning.
Yeah. And what she does so well with what you're just saying is Fitz's ability to reflect.
Yeah.
And his ability to say, this is how I viewed it when I was this age, and this is how I view it now. And by the way you would read my comments while I'm reading this, you probably thought I hate Fitz. That's not true. I love him.
He's just an idiot.
He's so frustrating though. But the good thing is he's always able to come back and recognize it though. Yes. And after you find out a lot of his disconnect and a lot of his he makes decisions that you like, I can't even fathom why you would do that. When you realize it's because he poured all of his pain into a stone.
A lot of himself into that. And
you're like, well, of course these would be the decisions. It really makes you kind of take back. I kind of apologized to Fitz, and it's like, you weren't able to have those types of complex emotions because you disconnected yourself from your pain.
And for context, it's as you learn as you go through the books of the nature of what that does, is reading it through the second time, you realize, of course he's like that. He has deliberately partially forged himself. You know, Verity couldn't react to Ketrican mourning because he's almost completely forged. He's given away that connection. He's put it into the stone. And all of that reframes everything you learn about memory and how it informs self. Because I try and explain this to people who struggle with Kennett in live ships, that he's partially forged himself by giving so much of his history to Paragon. He literally cannot evolve.
It's
he
not
cannot grow.
He is not able to. His brain doesn't fire that way, right?
Yeah. And so while that isn't clear in live ships, if you are aware of the greater story, his character makes more sense, because you're like, that's why he couldn't take the opportunity to grasp the chances he had to become good, because he had so many. You're always waiting for that redemption arc from him, and it never comes.
I know. I can't. Kennett is hands down one of the most dynamic, complex, and absolutely brilliantly written characters I've ever come across. And it's just it's one of those things that I can't justify his actions, but there's reasoning behind all of them. And so much of it is because of that disconnect. And I feel like it's this really poignant analogy for people who bury trauma. And does it excuse their actions? No. But does it explain it and make so much sense? Yes. I mean, Kennett is acting like a traumatized person who's never been able to heal or process that or move past it. And it just makes you know, if you have people in your life who make really poor decisions, again, we're not excusing bad behavior, but it does help in understanding some bad choices sometimes.
And give them, allow that grace and go, okay, I don't know what their history is, but maybe there's a reason.
Maybe it plays into it. Like there can be some reasoning, and you can make choices that build up and kind of add, you know, bad character to your life experience, but it doesn't necessarily make it your fault always. And it doesn't necessarily make you a bad person. Like there is redemption even after bad choices, and it may not be a full redemption arc. It's not going to change how we feel about you. It doesn't undo your actions, but you can still make good choices even after bad ones. And I think Kennett is just, I love that character. Like, and I really do.
Exceptionally well written. And we talk about in writing so much of this whole, you know, death of an author thing, where you kind of have to separate the creator of it from the thing. And I look at it in micro in this book, and you go, okay, Kennett, if you do the death of the writer concept around Kennett, you go, look at what he achieved in his lifetime. Some really amazingly good stuff. So if you take him out of that equation as an individual, as Kennett the person, and just leave Kennett the
figurehead, or
and you're left with just goodness. You're left with you know, improved lives for hundreds of people. And but when you look at Kennett the person,
that's
not very nice.
I was talking to somebody on Discord today, and I wish I could remember who it was so I could like give them credit for this, but they were saying the exact same thing, basically, where this is why it's important that Kennett is a POV character, because otherwise, if you're simply from the outside looking in, he looks like a protagonist. He's freeing slaves. Absolutely. You know, he's creating, like, in a lot of ways, peace on the waters. He's creating commerce. He's creating jobs. He's like really building value to this whole community. And he keeps kind of accidentally getting himself in these situations where he's like, even if it just benefits me a little, in the public eye, it's going to benefit me a lot.
Yeah.
So that's worth it. And he's still able to do his like sneaky self-serving things underneath, but no one's ever going to view him that way. So that's why it's so important that he is a POV character, because we know that
he doesn't actually intend that. That's not what he's aiming for. That's a byproduct. And the talent that takes as an author, I just, wow. And we keep getting context. Every book adds that little bit of context until you realize, wow, over the last trilogy, that completely reframed a situation from earlier. And the thing that
it happens over and over and over again.
Oh yeah.
Where you get a new piece of information and just like all of a sudden you're like, oh, you're like that meme, like, oh, absolutely. Yeah, I remember that. Like now that makes sense. Well, and there's small things where, for example, in Tawny Man, I was not a huge fan of the Hap storyline. Like while I was reading it, it felt somewhat unnecessary, and it was kind of repetitive. And I got to thinking about it. I was like, even if that whole part of the story was taken out, I don't think it would have changed the story that much. Nope. And it never frustrated me or anything, or I didn't dislike it. But it was the one thing that if I was going to nitpick, I wasn't a fan of the Hap. But in Fitz and the Fool, I feel like we need Hap Gladheart. Like, yes. I feel like that's it. It's so worth it to have all that we invested in Hap, all the pages, all the time. Yeah, I feel like it's all very, very worth it in Fitz and the Fool to have Hap Gladheart. And every time a new character is introduced, I'm like, do we really need another character? Like, I really like what we got going on here. Especially with Shine. I'm bad with names and stuff, but yes, Shun and yes, Shun and Lance. The whole time during, I get these.
I couldn't stand them the first time I read.
And Fool's Assassin, I was just
like them, get rid of them.
And I'm like, are they ever going to have even a tiny bit of redemption? Like, I'm waiting for some redemption, and sure enough,
but far more than you anticipated. Were they important? Way more than I anticipated.
And even with Shun, it's like he didn't change who she was fundamentally ever, but you still became very attached to her.
You do become attached to her because, like anything, the more you learn about her, the more you can put her behavior in context, and you go, okay, that's why she's the way she is.
And after you really learn how much she means to Shade and stuff.
Yeah. So,
there's so many moments.
So many moments. It's really quite wild. Rain Wilds. Sorry. Word association. How did you feel about Rain Wilds? Because I find that that's usually the one I really struggle to get people to want to read and not sort of hate read and sort of just be like,
so I was expecting to hate read it, and in his credit, Scott never put that on me. He never said he said in my opinion there's some of my lower tier least favorite of the entire thing, but he said they're not as bad as people are trying to make me feel like they are. And I fully expected to just read through it as fast as I could, to get through it, but I liked them. I will say that the Thymara storyline is my least favorite plot line of the entire realm of the Elderlings. That to me got pretty old with the who will I choose? It never really did anything for me, but I liked the books. I definitely think the last two were way better than the first two, but even the first two, I never found myself actively disliking the books. I was like, if this is the worst she can do in the realm of the Elderlings, then we are very, very fortunate, because I didn't think there was one stinker in the whole series. No.
And that's the joy
I do understand if people don't really dig it. I'm just like, I do hope you push forward to Blood of Dragons, though, because I think that one is especially really, really good. And I mean, anytime if we're getting to bring back, Althea and Paragon and Rain and Malta, and I love anytime you get like guest appearances from other trilogies and stuff. So I really liked it, and I love how the world building in this whole series is so it's slow and progressive. So eventually you're ending up with this huge fantasy world that's as big as some of the bigger things I've ever read. But it never felt overwhelming because it happens incrementally and it builds on each other, to where I'm glad that there are some good maps out there, because I like myself a good fantasy map, but you almost don't even need it because it's built so strategically that the whole coastline makes sense. Like the inner duchies, like where are the mountain kingdoms in relation to Jamalia? Like you kind of have a map growing in your head the whole time. So I thought that was done really well, because sometimes that can be super overwhelming when you're coming to a new fantasy world and it's like, where are the Riverlands, and next to the Vale, it's a lot. But even some of to me, this was more digestible than even some of the best fantasy worlds I've ever been familiar with.
Oh yeah.
And it happens so subtly that you're like, wait, do I know this whole world like the back of my hand? I'm pretty sure I do.
I do. Yes, and it is gradual and it's never info dumpy. The exposition is always done in a way that fits the story. So, okay, we're going to learn about the land because Fitz is traveling through it. So you get a sense of distance and you get a sense of weather and you get a sense of the ways people occupy their time. Are they farmers? Are they fishermen? Are they sheep herders? You get a sense
and
of
then
the
even just like
because
the
of
clothes they wear and the dialect and the customs. Like it's almost amazing to me that Bingtown and Live Ship and the Six Duchies are taking place at the same time in history, because Bingtown seems so much more advanced. Well, guess what? It is. And if you went back to that same timeline in the world, there would be societies, if you were at that same time in London versus that same time in, India, they're going to look very different. So, and I just thought it was just very authentic, that even though it's a completely fantastical and it's made up and it's not real, it felt lived in, it felt believable, it felt consistent. Because one thing I can't stand is when fantasy worlds break their own rules.
Oh, yes.
and like you said, with travel time and stuff like that, I'm not one that can just chalk it up to being like, it's a book. Like if you've set rules, if you set, boundaries and maps and stuff, then I think you need to follow your own rules. And I felt like she was always very respectful of travel time and language barriers and just cultural differences where, they would never think of doing XYZ in Jumpe, but in Claris, so like I love that it felt authentic and lived in.
Yes. Sorry. Oh, that didn't work.
Yeah.
The difference in how trade affects areas as well. The fact that the economy of the world made sense, that you understood very early that fish of any kind, dirt cheap and buckkeep. But when he moved inland, he was finding that I think the exact phrase was, fish we wouldn't feed to a cat was expensive here.
Delicacy.
It was a delicacy. It was valued because of its rarity. So you understand really early on that the economy is going to work because she's thought about it. Furs are going to be cheap in the Mountain Kingdom. Everybody's going to have furs. But they're going to be really expensive if you're up in Shokes, and it's
exactly like the economics. They check out.
They do, and the fact that it's referenced in Live Ships that the war 7 years ago is still affecting trade because of what did and didn't come up and down the waterways. When you've got nowhere to sell your goods, you're going to have a surplus. It's then going to affect how you're making those goods because you've got a surplus. And then when the trading lanes open up again, well, your production's gone down because you had a surplus for ages. So it's still affecting them. That there was a war 7 years ago, and it's affected them to the point that it's given new traders the ability to come in and undermine the economy further because
and that's shaking up the economy as well.
And that economic foundation fuels a lot of the things that go on in Live Ships. None of it would need to have happened if the Vestrit family's farms were producing, because they wouldn't be so desperate for cash that
exactly.
Kyle then goes and decides that, well, I need to do a run in slaves because we need the money.
Run in slaves, yeah.
You know, so all of it works. The intricacy of it is there, but it doesn't feel complicated to read. Like you haven't had to read all of that.
Right. And it never felt to me like I was getting a lesson in economics, which sometimes in these fantasy books you do. Like you feel like, oh, like, are we going to have another exposition dump about economics? Yeah. No, it just made logical sense that war affects like trade. Like, that happens, and it's going to take a decade or two for it to, even back out. And honestly, without a queen as aggressive towards making things better as Kettricken was, like, it probably would have taken longer. Yeah. I was just very, very pleased at how well fleshed out they ended up making her character be, especially since you never get a Kettricken POV. No. And part of it is even more endearing because that every bit of information that we get about her is from Fitz's point of view. Yeah. And we love her because Fitz loves her. And absolutely. Yeah. And their relationship dynamic to me is
so beautiful.
She has a way of making these intimate and meaningful relationships that aren't romantic. Yes. I don't know that. I mean, like, obviously the biggest one is Fitz the Fool, clearly. Yeah. But he has that type of relationship with a lot of people. Yeah. And it's funny because he doesn't think he has these types of connections with people.
No, he doesn't.
But people love him. Yeah. The way that he wishes he could love people. But it's like, but again, I think that's just human nature, which is what Hobb captures so magically. Beautifully. But we all have relationships like that where we think like we're just enamored with this person and we respect them and we look up to them and we feel a closeness with them, but we're we're not worthy. But people view us and they're like, what are you talking about? Like, I love the crap out of you. So I love their dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, they are amazing. And when we think about everything we know about the characters in the Fitz-centric stories, we're getting them from Fitz's point of view, and we're getting his point of view and getting more information than he is, because we're watching the dynamics between other characters and we're registering more than he is because he's an idiot. but that's okay. We love him. But it means that we get to know these characters sometimes more deeply than central characters in other stories. And these people don't get POVs. They get very little backstory versus what we learn on the page. Right. But we can infer a lot of their backstories from what Fitz is seeing.
Mm-hmm. Like and how they treat people around them, and
Burrick and Patience,
and how
they
are
for
consistent.
Me. Yeah. The relationship between Patience and Burrick, you don't learn until quite late that they had this history. And yet, when you reread, it's part of Burrick's character from the moment you meet him. The very first moment you meet him, he's standing up to defend Patience from the gossip in the kitchens, because they've said, oh, well, if chivalry hadn't married Patience, this wouldn't be a problem. And on your first read, you think he's standing up to defend chivalry. When you've got his backstory, you read it and you're like, oh no, he was totally standing up because they badmouthed Patience.
You're like, I've got to reread him right now.
But all of it was there already. Like, she didn't make up this backstory later. It was clearly always that was the relationship, what that was to start with. Everything we learn about people's backstories on the reread were always there. And you can see them. Because that's what they're reacting to. That's clearly part of their makeup, was that backstory that you don't know about yet. And
I just can't even
exquisite writing.
And I can't even fathom having that type of ability to think that many steps ahead on so many different threads.
Yeah.
Like, that's just incredible.
I wonder how much of it is she just knows the characters. She doesn't need to know the events of their past, but she knows what's happened to them, and she knows how they feel about things. And from there, it's just writing the character as they are. But she knows her characters so well that not just the secondary but the tertiary and the extras, in any other book, they would be just another stableman. But we know that Hans is a little bit submissive because his bossy wife rules him, and he's actually really happy now. We know this about
because it makes sense because it's that person. They just feel so real. They feel so real.
And that's magical to me. But
another impressive arc that I didn't think she could bring me around for was Molly. I was never a Molly hater, but I was very just in this. Up until the final trilogy, honestly, to where you get to really spend time with her as an adult.
Yeah.
I really was just like Fitz. It wasn't even about Molly because I don't think she ever acted anything but honestly pretty reasonable for her age and for her situation. But to me, I was like, Fitz, honey, I know you loved her, and I'm not downplaying that, but you got to move on.
Yeah.
Like you were a kid. Like,
that's right.
and I know that young love is real love. I believe that, but you were a kid, and so it was like Molly just always felt like something that I wanted him to get over it. It wasn't about her necessarily. It was about how he infatuated over her. I needed it to be over. I was tired of hearing about him thinking about Molly. But man, Molly and why I can never remember the names of these things about Fool's Assassin. The first one. I love that woman.
Yeah, I really liked Molly.
I have so much respect for her. I had so much respect for her in that book.
I think, and Evie actually made me sort of bring my thinking into line, because my problem was always that how could you want to love Molly? She doesn't even know you. But that's Fitz's fault. He was the one that kept that from her. And we don't know if she would have loved all of him, because she might have. And so I've had to spend a bit of thought on that lately, because I've been putting that on Molly, and that isn't deserved. And as you say, in Fool's Assassin, when we meet her as a woman and we learn that she has actually welcomed patients into her home for so many years, that could have gone horribly wrong. They're both very strong-willed women.
Yeah.
But she made that work because it was important to Fitz. And that adds that depth to Molly that was missing for so long, because all we had was Fitz's infatuation.
Like I said, I found myself frustrated by Fitz's infatuation and Fitz's decision making when it came to Molly, but I could always put myself in her shoes, because she was frustrated because she knew he wasn't telling her everything. And if you're going to have a real relationship with somebody, there has to be that honesty there. And it always frustrated me for her. Yeah. It frustrated me for her that Fitz thought the two of them were the same. And she's like, we are not the same.
So not.
You were raised in a castle. I don't care if you're a bastard. You have lived on Easy Street your whole life, which is so funny because she's right. Like, in that world, in the whole grand scheme of things, even though he was a bastard and, blah, blah, he had his woes.
Yeah, he was fed and clothed and trained.
He was fed and clothed and trained and educated and had a bed in his own room. Like, he had, and so it was funny because he truly believed that they were equals, that like they were underdogs. No, and it was Molly and Fitz against the world. And she was like, I'm sorry, what world do you live in? And so like she needed that trust between them to kind of bridge the gap, and he was never willing to give that to her. So I never blamed her for her harshness towards him. And also she was pregnant, and also she's older.
Rely on him. And she knew she couldn't rely on him as much as she loved him, and she did love him. She's gone, I can't put that above this baby that I'm going to have. I have to step up here for me and my child. And she did it. And I admired her in the moment, and I admired her. I always have for that, because damn straight she do that, girl.
I've always been one too that understood the decision for Molly and Burrick.
Yes, me too.
And because in that world, like she wouldn't have made it as a single mom. Like, it's
Hell
not
no,
2022.
not an option.
It's not even 1950. Like,
no, it's just not an option.
It's not an option, especially with all the rumors that were already going around with her and Fitz and the witted bastard and all of that. Like, she needed someone to take care of her. And as Fitz's father figure, it was kind of his responsibility in a way. And so I
never, how he felt.
And I never begrudged the two of them.
I always thought it was actually incredibly well done because it worked for both of them. Molly, she's bringing baggage with an alcoholic father, so she is the daddy issues girl. So she's going to find Burrick attractive.
And the only thing she needed from Fitz was stability. So it makes very practical sense to go with a man who is going to be kind to her, he's going to provide for her, and he's going to be honest. Because if Burrick was anything, he was straightforward and honest. And so I'm like, in the fact that they were able to form a beautiful life together and love each other in their own way, I was not. People are
and
still.
It never felt to me like it was a second best situation. They genuinely found love together.
I think they were
born because they both loved Fitz. Yes. But relationships have been found on far worse.
On less, and also, like, having a shared secret is
incredibly bond. That's a very strong connection.
And I think in the beginning it was a let's make the best out of a really bad situation, but the best ended up being really amicable for a long time, and they had a good life together. So I love that for them.
I loved that for them, and I loved too that it was honest on both parts. Both of them knew who they were. Both of them knew what they wanted. Both of them knew what they were offering the other.
Yep. And they had that common bond, like you said, of loving Fitz.
And they both love it. And as a extension of that, they both love Nettle for the connection to Fitz. So not only do they love her because she's Nettle and she's a baby, and of course everybody loves babies, they're so great.
Right.
But she's also Fitz's baby.
They were probably able to just really bond over, like, this is what we have left of him. Let's pour all ourselves into this baby. And also they thought he was dead.
Exactly. And that's something
why not take comfort in each other?
Burrick would never have accepted her offer had he believed that Fitz was still out there. He wouldn't have.
Right.
That's just not who Burrick is. But he'd been grieving for Fitz now for some time. He believed Fitz was gone. So there was no harm in this, to accept love from somebody and give love in return. And also, if
you love somebody, the right thing to do is to take care of
the people
they loved as well.
And so for that it always
they were able to do that they were able to be there for each other, but they also probably really believe that they were doing the right thing for Fitz as well.
And for Nettle.
And it just was very unfortunate that he had to be from the outside looking in for all those years.
And that's the tragedy of his story, and it did fuel a lot of the things he did. But there was also a trust, and we got it from Night Eyes when he returns from having been running with the wolves, and Fitz tells him that Molly's had a baby. And Night Eyes is like, well, then what are we doing here? Why aren't we going to Molly? Because she has our cub. She needs looking after.
Yeah.
And Fitz says, Burrick's with them. And Night Eyes just goes, oh, heart of the pig. That's okay. Just total calm from Night Eyes. Like, yes, that is appropriate.
Yes.
I'm okay with
He will watch our cub. Yeah.
He will take care of the people that we care about. And I mean, if you're going to get an okay from someone, Night Eyes is the one you want to get an okay from.
You can trust his judgment. Yeah,
because
you can take that to the bank.
Totally the brains of the operation. So
absolutely. Father.
Wasn't that just beautiful to get?
Yeah. So I'm so glad that no one spoiled this for me, because even just knowing that I was going to get it would be take away from the experience of it happening organically. But I was unaware that we were going to get a perspective from B.
Yeah.
And so when I opened that page and I realized that it was coming from B's perspective, I was like,
such a shock.
Yes, I'm so happy. And then, like I said, we had some whispers from Night Eyes throughout the trilogy.
Yeah.
But when he really started communicating with her as
his own
wolf father.
Yeah.
I love that dynamic. I mean, if you had told me that like a ghost wolf and a weird baby would have, but it worked so perfectly.
It was perfect. And I've always said that for all that Fall is like, yes, this is the three of our children, me, you, Fitz, and Molly. I've always believed that she's the child of all four, because Night Eyes and Fitz, when he was dead at the end of Royal Assassin, they inhabited the same body for a period of time.
Yes,
and then
the same concept with
and then were separated into their two vessels. That's how I look at it. So it's orange juice and water, mix them together, pour them back into 2 cups. They now both have orange juice and water. That's firmly what I believe that Fitz,
and then you add apple
within
juice, the Fool, to the mix. And you now got 3 cups.
Both absolutely part of Fitz, not just Fitz and the memory of Night Eyes, but Fitz and the essence of Night Eyes.
Yes, the essence is a good word.
So when you bring in the love from the Fool and you bring in the love with Molly, B is absolutely the child of all four.
Yeah,
so for her to still have Night Eyes in her absolutely worked for me. Worked for me.
When I finished the series, I was scrolling through like Google Images looking for fan art, which, by the way, there needs to be more Realm of the Elderlings fan art. But I found, and I'll send it to you when we're done chatting, but it was this beautiful image of B, and she's sitting cross-legged, and it looks like there's roots coming. She's sitting on the ground. It looks like there's roots, like tree roots coming under her. And there's Fitz, there's Molly, there's the Fool, and there's Night Eyes, all part of the vines that are making her. And I'm just like, that's the perfect visual. Yes, that's a perfect visual. Because she's a little bit of everybody.
She is. And it was a hell of a risk, really, for Robin Hobb to make. For her to go, do you know what? All of these books that we've had from Fitz that everybody loves, I'm going to make a new POV. It
was a huge risk.
What if that hadn't landed? That would have tanked 16 books worth of text.
Oh man, it landed.
But it landed. And it was just to finally see Fitz properly through somebody's eyes, not just how they reacted to him, but saw him. And to see him from B's perspective gave me something I didn't know I wanted, which was that perspective on him. And to hear her talk about him, the fact that she could feel his magics simmering away in a covered pot, you sort of like, he's really powerful. There's so much magic in him that no wonder people who had power felt uncomfortable around him.
Yeah.
But you'd never had that perspective before, and to get it gave context.
And how we get our perspective almost from a few perspectives, because she's looking at him first from her B brain, which is very face value and literal. But then she's reading all his journal entries, but she understands them and going, if he acts like this, but he thinks this, then I bet he feels like this.
That's right.
Because she has the ability to think like,
she can make those connections and go,
because she thinks in a complex way, like only
Fool
Beloved can. And so I love that she was able to go, these are his behaviors. These are his thoughts on his behaviors. And this is what I think it actually means.
Yes.
And no one else other than Beloved was able to know him that well.
That's right. And never having got a POV from Beloved, which is a sadness in itself, but we never got to see that relationship from their perspective.
That is my bucket list dream thing ever. It would not to be I don't know, if I could get a tight trilogy that's kind of the whole thing from his perspective. I don't know how you could do that, but
I don't know.
But if
but
I think
it would be amazing,
because you don't want to retell it, but he had such a unique perspective that I feel like it would be really
be a different story. It would be
a different story completely, and I could only hope for such a thing. But what was I going to say?
I don't know, but I do love Full. I do love them.
Beloved I mean, just it has to be one of my favorite characters in all of fiction. I've never
when you
come
consider
across
that
something
Full
so complex.
Was created in the mid-90s when we were still very limited in the way that we saw non-binary characters. Full was created then, and Full has grown to a character who sort of encompasses a lot of non-binary identification. So I imagine that that's very there's a word, not satisfying, but that will do for now, for readers who aren't binary.
Yeah, no,
they feel seen, that this is valid. I don't have to be.
I was thinking the same thing. It's like a very great example of inclusivity, like, but without feeling like any type of agenda is being pushed, because sometimes that's a word that, like, anytime there's like an openly gay character, sometimes it feels like a little forced, like box. They're like, okay, like, I've got my gay character. Like, we're telling the story, and we're gonna have one of these, and one of these. It never felt. It felt authentic. It felt organic, and it felt like from someone who is, boring old heterosexual, straight as they come. It made me feel like I get it. Like, that's what that feels like. That's what that means. That's a great example of that. I mean, it felt like my eyes were opened a little bit. Okay. Like, I don't, and again, I don't know if she was trying to do anything, but she wrote a character as they are, and it never
how other people interacted with them. The awkwardness,
it never felt anything but authentic and beautiful and perfect. And what an amazing example too of how you can have an extremely intimate relationship with someone that's even somewhat romantic, I believe.
Yeah, I do too.
Without it necessarily being sexual.
No, or right. I see all of Realm of the Elderlings as one of the greatest love stories I've ever read.
Yes,
because the love
Fitz and the Fool is one of the Fitz and the Fool specifically is one of the greatest love stories I've ever read.
Yeah,
and it the scene, and it had to be the middle one, which is Golden Fool. I know all the names are so like interchangeable for me. You know the scene I'm talking about, but where Fitz messes up big time, in my opinion.
So big.
Because
I was so angry with him.
Like, he said, I could never be that way with you. And the Fool says, don't you think I know that?
Yeah.
Like,
I would never ask it of you.
I've never expected that from you, because I know you.
Yeah.
And I know.
And it's not something that's important.
That's not important to me. And the fact that you had to react so ugly, that's why I never, like, you reacted in the absolute worst case scenario, because now you can't take it back. You can apologize.
Now we have to live with the memory of those words.
But now we have to live with the memory of you reacting in a horrible way to something that you pushed. You pushed that answer out of him.
Yeah.
When he's like, I've been fine with keeping it the way it is, and you had to push me to this answer, and now you don't want it.
I knew you didn't want, and I was never going to ask you for. And that broke my heart. That entire thing.
Brokenhearted. I was so
angry. So angry.
I was angry. I can't even tell you how many times I was angry at Fitz, but that was a big one for me.
Yeah, I was very angry with Fitz.
Yeah,
but it was a really critical moment. Well, it was a catalytic moment. I mean, he is the catalyst, and obviously that dynamic plays out in all areas of his life, including with Beloved. And that moment catalyzed his thinking around Full, where he had to start accepting that Full was only giving him this part of themselves, because that was the part they knew Fitz could deal with.
Yes.
And it's like,
he was catering to Fitz's comfort zone.
Asked for that. He gave you what you wanted. That section of himself.
You asked me for more. But I was already giving you. I was already giving you the maximum amount that I believed you could handle, and you just proved me right.
That's right.
By acting like an ass.
Oh, such an ass. Such an ass.
And the fact that he regretted that, like, like as soon as it happened, you were like, what a bonehead, but it's done, it's over. And a reaction is a reaction for a reason. Like,
that's right.
You don't mean to do, it's reactive. And that shows the true reaction. And that's why it was so hard to watch that whole scene play out. It's because Fitz is going to regret it. But at the same time, it's like, make better choices. It's chivalry, Farseer.
Yes. And
other
that
moments
dynamic
that
changed beautifully over the years. It just
and like, but again, he totally redeems himself in Fool's Fate, and they they reach that level of connection, that
and understanding of
mountaintop moments.
Yes, and there were moments, and I did like that it was addressed, where in Fool's Fate you get Civil going, you can't spend the night in there, and you know what he's, and Fitz having to say, he's my friend.
Yeah.
And I know what
he eats crow for it a few times. Yeah.
I know what's between us, and that's all that matters.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated that. And the fact that they had to kind of beat Civil up with it and go, no, that's not what you think.
But good for Civil, though. Civil comes around as well and becomes a pretty stand-up guy, and he matures to the point where he can go, listen, I used to think this guy was
to think he was terrible,
but he's all right and we should trust him. Like she manages to really build in these character arcs for people that you didn't think necessarily were going to be worth anything or matter to you, and next thing you know, you're like, I'm proud of you, Civil Singer. Good for you. Like, I didn't know I cared so much, but I do. But it always happens in a very human way as well.
Very.
Like, it's not these like, I used to be terrible and then something happened and now I'm better. Like, it happens in a human and believable way.
Because you don't get it like that either. You get a situation where he reacts in a way that is logical for his character, and he's like, no, you can't go in there. He likes boys. Oh, we are. And then things happen. And then much later, Civil says, no, this is a good person. And all of that intervening time, you then go, Civil was paying attention and has recognized he was wrong. But it's never a big moment. It's just like he corrects somebody later when they make the similar reaction he does. So it's never this really clear line. It just happens within the story, completely
and it's just bits of satisfying payoff. Yeah. That you're like, you know what? It only took a few sentences for her to like make that payoff. Yeah. But all the like frustration we went through with Civil, for one example. Yeah. Even, I mean, Starling's a great example of a character that like she constantly gives you reason to not care for Starling, in my opinion. Like, I always enjoyed her as a character because I love a bard character, and I think they're very important to history and to like the world building, and I like having a bard along because it's kind of easy. I say easy, I'm not an author. It's easy to weave them back in conveniently when you need to. So like, I love the bard character as a catalyst. But she gave you reason over and over again to be like, get off my page, you make, but at the same time, at the same time, like, she's literally an adulterer and has no apologies. Like, she feels very strongly that like her choices are hers to make, and so you on one hand you really kind of see her point, but the other hand you're like, no, this is pretty unforgivable. And the fact that she didn't tell Fitz, like, so all this stuff is going on, and you're like, ugh. That somehow they still managed to make every intricacy and complexity to her character pay off in such a monumental way, which by the way, that scene where she gets all her payoff and where they recognize like, that has to be when Fitz is acknowledged as Fitz Farseer, that has to be one of the most,
that is the most, still to me, the most emotional moment in the books. Yeah, that's the one that has me absolutely broken and crying, because
I can't even think about it without tearing up. And also you're like, you know what? Good for you, Eliania. Like, what a good character. Again,
the sacrifice. He's literally given his life to the kingdom. Literally, he gave his life to the kingdom.
Yeah.
And it's just such a,
for him to
just be seen
to get it, and
oh,
a lot of times in books you expect everything to go wrong. I mean, and of course it does go wrong shortly after, but like during the actual ceremony and stuff, everything happens so perfectly, and he's able to actually enjoy it, and all the people that he wanted to be able to see it for the most part, I mean, are there in the room. You know, Nettle's there, and Dutiful is there, and Kedrigan is there, and he's able to tell the whole thing to the fool shortly after, I believe. Or was and Shade, he had to tell him afterwards. No, Shade was there. Shade was there still.
Yeah.
So like, it's so satisfying for him to have that mountaintop moment, and of course things are about to go terribly wrong shortly after.
The
like
bottom is about to fall out of his world.
Nightmare city for him. But I appreciate that she gave us and him that moment before everything went so bad. The only thing better is I wish that, you know, B could have been there. But it was important. I think it was important for her to understand who her dad is, how she did, for that to happen, for her to be able to witness him being who he was. But man,
she already knew that more than anyone from his journals.
Yeah. I didn't think we were going to get that scene though, and I
didn't either.
So pleased to get Starling was able to tell the whole story.
It comes out of nowhere. There's no foreshadowing that this is going on. You don't know Eliana's planning this, and it just happens. So you're as shocked as Fitz is with this.
I know. Holy crap! I mean,
panic moment, and then it goes so beautifully, and I was beside myself. And one of my favorite moments within that scene is Blade's grandson being really angry with him and going, my granddad died, thinking he betrayed you.
Yeah. And for Fitz to know that like there are people all along who were on his side, who wanted to see him succeed, who wanted to believe the rumors and the tales.
Yeah.
And for him to see himself as a hero finally after all those years, and not just to Kedrigan, but to everybody. Yeah. So good, so good. And like, and Dutiful ended up being such an amazing son and king and husband and dad and nephew, son, whatever cousin he is.
And it's that we're shifting the cycle of time, because you see that cycle of parenting other men's sons, seeming to fail at parenting those sons, watching those sons make the same mistakes, and you see that cycle with Burrick, and we see it with Fitz, and we see it with Hat, and they change things. And Dutiful isn't part of that cycle.
Yeah.
His direction has changed. So we see that for all of the specific events of the realm of the Elderlings, the Fool's concept of the why we make these changes, the cycles we're trying to break,
the cycles
see that they're working, and the realm of the Elderlings, the title of the series, so often gets forgotten when you read them because they all stand so beautifully as their own stories. But it's only in that last trilogy that you go, holy crap, we were talking about Elderlings the whole time.
The whole
this
time.
story was happening the whole time.
The whole time, yep.
And that was just such...
Yeah.
It's amazing to read.
You're so right, because, you know, when you're reading Farseer, like there's little bits about the Elderlings, you know, Verity's quest and his solution, but you're still kind of like, okay, if you say so.
Yeah.
And then live ship, maybe no mentions to very, very few. Like, I mean, there's some Elderling, obviously, references in Trahog and like all the stuff in the Rain Wilds. But again, it's still kind of like, I mean, she picked a random thing to name the whole series after, but okay. Yeah, it just felt like historical world building.
Yeah.
And even through the Rainwild books, you know, you're learning about Rainwild history, but it still feels so contained.
Yeah.
And then in the final trilogy, when everything gets looped together and woven, and you're like,
and you see what Clarice has been doing to
the whole story.
Elderlings.
The whole story was about Elderlings. Yeah.
Yeah. And the things that Clarice had been doing that were impacting events in all of those earlier series, that you're just like, whoa. And I promise you now, the first reread that you do, you're going to be just gobsmacked, because all of it is there. She's not hiding it. None of it's hidden. None of it's secretive. Wait. It's on the page. And you read it and you're like, holy crap, how did I not see this until that late? Because it doesn't feel like part of a story. It's just part of that story.
It's so subtle. Yep.
Blew my mind the first time I had full context when I reread. I like, holy crap.
I've said it 100 times, but I cannot wait to, and I don't know when I will, but
It'll be there when you're ready.
Yeah, so I'm not one of those people who has like my whole year planned out or anything. So I don't know when I'll get to it, but at this point I think it'll at least be, in the next couple of years, because
be reread at some point.
I can't stop thinking about it, and I don't want to stop thinking about it. And here's a question, do you do any audiobooks? Do you enjoy audiobooks?
I do audiobooks. I only do them with things I've already read. Otherwise just straight through.
No.
But the narrators change with each sub-series of
I'm an audiobooker, and that was I don't mind
the Farseer narrator. That's fine. I cannot stand the woman who does live ships.
I know she does Rain Wilds too, and I'm like, really? You change narrators with every sub-series, but the one time you do a repeat,
it's the one that works.
And the thing is, and her name is, I don't remember her name.
Anne Flosnick.
Anne Flosnick. The thing is, she's not a bad narrator. I think she does a lot of amazing voices, and she gets the emotion, the intensity, like when you're supposed to be nervous or scared or sad. She's
conveying those in there. Yeah,
she does a good job. I just don't care for her delivery or her voice. It's not my style very much. Every series I did what I call like immersive reading, where I do it together, or I'll trade off. I kind of like to do a little bit of everything. But while I was reading these, the job I have is very, very compatible to audiobooking. And I'm just a super auditory learner. I'm geared, my brain is very geared to audio. So I was able to audio a lot. And you're right. So Farseer has an incredible narrator. Tawny Man probably wins with one of the best narrators ever. Fitz and the Fool, it was okay. There was a few, he made the Fool sound German, which I did not care for. Yeah. But either way, he was fine. But I'm like, why did you have to reuse? Because I'll be honest,
for the one subset that has 4 books, not just
4 books. Yeah. But Lives of Traitors is probably my second favorite of all of them. And I know it's hard between Tawny Man and Live Ship because they're so different that it's hard to like rank one over the other. But Live Ship Traitors is such a perfect,
it's such a technically brilliant trilogy.
And I would never ever recommend or suggest anyone do this, but it is written in a way that if someone wanted to pick up that trilogy and read it,
I recommend it as a standalone. If someone has no interest in reading a 16-book series, I would absolutely recommend they read Live Ships as a standalone trilogy, because
other than a few things that are like, I mean, really, obviously the bit with Amber is going to be, there's going to be no impact there. No. Yeah, they're just going to be like, she's kind of weird, like what's her deal? And then obviously the payoff with Paragon and, having Fitz's face, like that's going to have no impact.
No, it's just going to be part of the story.
There's a few references to the Six Duchies, but otherwise it works super well, I think, as a standalone.
The references to Buckkeep are done in the same way as the references to Jamalia, where we haven't been to Jamalia. So we have no emotional connection to that city.
Sure. They call them the savages or whatever. Like they really think it's just this like antiquated culture. But I've thought about having my mom read Live Ship Traitors because I think it will click with her really, really well. Yeah. And then saying, okay, now, if you like that, can I interest you in...
I do struggle with and I'm getting better at being shooty about it, people who begin the series with live ships, because for me it undermines completely what happens in Farseer, because you learn about the life cycle of dragons in live ships, and so it means that everything Verity is trying to do meaningless. And so even though you follow the story and Verity wins and this happens, yay, there's not the emotional payoff that you get if that's your first dragon.
Because that's what makes the serpents and the dragon life cycle so intriguing, because you're like, well, what about the stone dragons? Like, how does that tie into what
and that's
Verity
what keeps the confusion happening as long as it does. Without knowing about the stone dragons, it seems far more obvious that serpents and dragon, okay, they're connected, not a problem. But because you're bringing the stone dragons with you, you're going,
and that's something I loved in Tawny Man too, is they're assuming that they're unearthing a stone dragon, and the reader is going,
but it might be a real dragon.
But it might be a real dragon. Like, you don't know until they know. You're like, it could literally just be a stone dragon that's like buried
because they found a carved one on the beach. You know, they found that carved one on the beach, which horrified Fitz, because he's like, crap, here is the insides of all of our forged people that we killed. Sorry, guys.
So I want to talk to you about Hobb villains, because I feel like you get almost like textbook examples of like every type of villain you can have in a story, but each one executed at like peak level.
Oh yes.
Because Regal is more of like a mustache twirling.
He is a very mustache twirling.
Just kind of like bad for the sake of being bad, but at the same time,
only because you only get him from Fitz.
But you only get him from Fitz's perspective, and from his point of view, he probably thinks he genuinely believes
that Fitz is out to get him. He genuinely believes that. He believes that Fitz was not only a party too, but possibly did kill directly his mother. He believes that, and
yes, it makes an interesting villain, because we just see him for his actions and for what Fitz feels about him. Which is literally an angsty teenage boy. Who is rivaling another
only slightly older
teenage boy. But like one who's spoiled and literally named Regal.
And so it's kind of like is out to get him.
Well, it's the same way I've always been a Sansa supporter from A Song of Ice and Fire, because I'm like, sure, she is spoiled and obnoxious and entitled, but she was raised to be a princess. Like, she's acting exactly how she was trained to act, and Regal is acting exactly how he was trained to act. So does he make bad choices? Is he frustrating? Yes, but he was curated to be who he's being.
Absolutely. And you see it when Fitz goes to Tradeford in Assassin's Quest, when he sees the palace at Tradeford, and he's like, wow, this place is amazing. And all it is him talking to himself about how amazing this palace is, and thinking, no wonder Regal hated Buckkeep. And in that one sentence,
this is what his standard was. Like, this is what he thought he deserved.
And in that one sentence, you learn so much about Regal, because you've just been told how beautiful, how well maintained, how gentle, how lush, how rich, how fantastic,
how Regal.
All of this is, and that he was forced to go to Buckkeep in winter every year, because winter is totally Buckkeep's season. Clearly that's when
it's winter now, but. And not only is Buckkeep not as
it's not gentle,
you don't have the same amenities.
No, there's nothing of luxury
also,
in Buckkeep.
The Farseers were just such practical people. It was bare bones. You didn't have gold. You didn't have decorations. You didn't have all the tapestries.
This is a castle at a river mouth.
It's kind of like the bachelor pad of castles. If you think about it, there's never
it's
really
a mattress with no box.
For a long time there wasn't a strong female presence in Buckkeep Castle. So it's really just like, I got a microwave and I got a couch. What else do I need? Like, it's kind of like the bachelor pad of castles.
Really
so
is.
Of course he shows up and he's just like, this is my inheritance. Or not quite, it's like gross. And then you have a conniving mom who thinks her baby boy deserves the world. Like,
so that's what he's getting in his head.
Yeah, his behavior is very believable.
Very. Absolutely. And so even with the only mustache twirly villain that we get, there is actually surprising depth.
There's depth. Yep, there is depth still.
But this is the thing, you don't have to read him with depth. You can skip over that sentence that gives you depth. You can miss the references to the fact he thinks that Fitz kills his mum. You can skip that. You can miss it. You can skip it. And all you get is the mustache twirly villain.
And it's still a pretty entertaining mustache twirling villain. Yep.
Still works.
Yeah. So then that's why I was so surprised. Because like I said, I did pick up on the depth, but it was still a pretty good, like, he's the villain. Like,
it was very
he doesn't like that. He tortured Fitz. Like, I don't like him, okay? Right? To death. Literally to death. And then spread terrible rumors about him.
Yeah.
So you go into live ship trailers thinking you kind of have the formula figured out, which is dumb, right? And then you meet Kyle.
Yes.
And you're like, I
cannot stand Kyle. And I said this to Evie last week.
It took 1 second of him being on the page for me to be like,
you can hook right off.
Yeah.
I still hate him the most of all of the villains. And he isn't the main antagonist in that series. He's not even the secondary antagonist of the series. But him, I hate the most. The visceral hatred for that man. I could
this comment someone said recently, they were trying to just be kind of cheeky and like find like one redeeming quality of Kyle. Well, so she said, well, at least he was nice to Malta. And I said, he was not nice to Malta.
Oh my God.
He set her up. He undermined Ronica and Kefria. Any good they were trying to do towards building character and teaching her about traitor ways and life and values, he undermined them.
Yeah.
And
because all she was to him was a pawn. She was to be pretty, she was to be biddable, and she was then to be married off for his advantage.
Marryable, yeah. And I said, no, don't you say that. He was not nice to Malta, because parents who love their children will hold them accountable and discipline them and teach them that sometimes you have to make sacrifices for family. Like, he was not nice to anybody ever.
No.
And the only thing I could ever say for him is, well, he was Chalcidian. Like,
yeah, he came from a culture where that was acceptable. So
okay.
There's reasons. And I think part of the reason I viscerally detest that man is because he exists. Kyles are out there.
Everywhere. Like, we've all known a Kyle.
Known them. But I'm a nice guy and I'm doing the best I can for you.
No, you're not. You're a con artist. And you think you can get away with it.
Horrible.
But I see right through you, Kyle.
Yeah. Whereas we don't necessarily encounter Kennett or Cosgrove. We don't encounter those people. So we can read them on the page and not be so viscerally engaged.
Because they're a little more extravagant and a little more scheming, and they are more along the lines of, even Regal, where they're bad,
but they're a book bad.
but Kyle, that's
is
like
real bad.
Like, there are you with Kyle and
Kyle is Umbridge.
Hess.
Kyle is Umbridge to Kennett's Voldemort, and it's
and it's the thing is, people know that you're not supposed to like Voldemort, but like, we understand Voldemort. Like,
but he's a book villain. That's
he's
his
a
role.
book villain. Is he supposed
Umbridge
to be
is
there?
Someone you've met.
Yes.
And
everyone has been
relatable.
Everyone's been manipulated by an Umbridge or a Kyle, and that's what makes it so.
Those people have stood in your way and hurt your life in some way.
Mm-hmm. And Hest, let's not forget about Hest.
Oh yeah, Hest is detestable.
Yeah, Hest is the whole time you're reading that. At least for me, I detested Hest for thinking he could treat people the way he did and get away with it. Yeah. But there was always a little bit
get away with it for so long.
Yes. But there was always a little bit that I'm like, well, maybe he's going to learn a lesson. He's going to come back around. Like, maybe we're going to get. I was thinking they were setting him up to be almost a little more of an extreme Malta. Yeah. Like, super selfish, only thinks about themselves, thinks they can mistreat people and get away with it. I was thinking it was going to be a Malta type character, but like worse, because he's not a little girl.
That's right.
But it turns out
he was actually
I'm
just
glad
horrible.
he got eaten by a dragon.
Yeah.
Like
your name is meat.
That last couple,
so, yeah.
the last couple scenes we get with him, I'm like, nope, there's no redemption. You need to die a horrible death.
And then he does, and no one cares, and it's perfect. It's so
yeah.
great.
Everyone's like, where'd that one guy go? Oh no.
Oh, we've got to deal with that asshole. Where is? No one knows where he is. Oh well, he's not here. That's all good.
No, my favorite parts of Rainwild Chronicles was Leftrin and Elise.
Yes.
I really, and Tarman, of course, and his crew. But more than anything, the dragon culture and really understanding the dragon POVs and being like, there's lots of different kinds of dragons in fantasy, and I love them all. I'm a huge sucker for dragons, but these dragons are special and they're different. And I love how, so right now, like I said, a bunch of people are reading Live Ship, and they're kind of tickled at how quickly and how easily Kenneth is able to connect with Vivacia. Yeah. And I'm like, once you read Rainwild Chronicles and you learn more about dragons and how they want to be complimented and sung to and praised and adored, I'm like, it makes total sense, because Vivacia is a dragon and Kenneth is a schmoozer. So it's the perfect, just, like in another world, he could have been a singer. He could have been
he could have become an Elderling in another world, because
he really could have. Yeah. And so it's funny because I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, well, geez, Vivacia will just put out for anybody, And then I'm like, no, it's because she's a dragon and she wants someone to lavish praise
literally sing her praises.
And Kenneth is just another thing. He kind of accidentally was just like, well, ladies love it when you talk to them like this, and it just happened to work with her because she's a dragon.
That's right. It also worked for me. Somebody said they were really upset about the changes in Vivacia that Kenneth brought about. For me, I was like, no, because Vivacia was a false personality that was imprinted on top of who she actually was. Yes. And who she actually is a dragon. Right. And so when she became a pirate ship, suddenly she could actually be herself. She's a predator. She's chasing. She's killing. She's able to tap into the parts of her dragon self that she's never even known existed, but they make her feel better.
They make her feel authentic. Yes. Yeah, that's the best word, predator. Like letting these ships know that they can indulge in their predator nature. Yeah. It brings out a different side of them.
Beautifully for them when that was what they were doing. Yeah. And that's something that none of the Bingtown traders have ever been aware of, and so have never catered to.
Tapped into that. Yeah. Oh, that's a great point.
Yeah, and we come back to the economy again, because very early on you start to think, well, shit, that makes the ships slaves, because they are sentient and they do have. Yay! Okay, we're back. All right, so where was I? The economy. Okay, so the live ships are slaves, in essence. They're sentient beings, if you will. So do they need to schedule time for the live ship to decide where they go? Should they be letting the live ships decide what they're trading in? How do you engage with a sentient ship to give it agency?
It gets really ethically complicated once the Bingtown traders know what's the truth. Yeah. Because, I mean, not that it takes it away or doesn't matter, but up until the revelation, like the full life cycle of the serpents and the wizard wood and the ships and everything comes into light, up until then, you can claim, innocence through ignorance.
That's right.
But after they know, I do feel like there is
a moral obligation there to do something about
Which
it.
is so funny when, you know, at the end of the whole series, when these dragons are busting out of ships and they're becoming dragons, and the fact that the traders have the nerve to be like, you can't do that. I'm like, I'd like to see you stop a live
You don't
ship.
actually get to choose that.
You don't really get to choose.
That's not up to you. And Althea and Brashen going, okay, we will have to build a new life. And
it's like, you're allowed to be sad. Yeah, you're allowed to be sad. Like,
but you were unwittingly,
yes, for Althea and Brashen, and for all the people that loved and cared for their live ships. You're allowed to be sad, but
absolutely,
you have
you're losing a lifestyle.
Now that you know how to free them, it's an absolute
on you to free them
requirement.
Yeah, and there are still ships like Ophelia who don't connect to a dragon within them, and I believe they're the ones whose cocoon's dragons had died before their cocoon was
and so let the dragon make the choice, because some of them may want to just stay comfortable being
Ophelia's.
It sounds like a ship. Ophelia and the Tenairas always had a really good relationship too. So like, I feel like the Tenairas probably treat Ophelia really well. I like to believe that. Yeah. So
although how much of the I'm the nice guy was Greg, I did not like Greg at all.
Well, I did like Greg, which first of all, Greg is a stupid name. It sounds fun when you say Greg to Naira, like all at once.
Yes. But on its own, it's like you just misspelled Greg.
I'm like, Robin, you did Kyle, you did Will. Why not just name him Greg? Like, just do Greg. I did like Greg, but at that point, I was already very committed to this Althea and Brashen thing in my head. And so I was like, Greg, whatever.
You have no
You're a great guy. I wish you all the best, but it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, I very much read him, and still do on every read. He is the benevolent misogynist. It's like, no, but I'm nice.
Yeah.
You still actually expect Althea to stay home and have children. And the concept that she says to you, well, what about my ship? I
kind of view him the same way I give somewhat of a pass to someone like Malta, or like, he was raised to believe that like this is the Beantown dream for a woman, is to marry a successful trader and then to be because like, let's not downplay the role of a trader wife. Like, you're the face of the family. You're going to the meetings. You're making the deals. You're managing inventory.
Like, they're not. What Yanni was not Yanni. Ronica. What Ronica was doing was abnormal.
Okay.
And it took me a couple of reads to see that properly, but it was frowned upon. The reason that they weren't very active in society was
it's because she was working.
She was working. She wasn't well-to-do enough to have somebody look after that for her. And
I see. Okay, no, that makes sense.
So I get what you're saying about Greg, because
again, not that it
home, his mother,
but it's understandable that he thought like, you're a trader born.
Was a mother and a wife before anything else. So yes, that adds context. That does add context to Greg. It does.
And Althea, it was kind of, and again, I never want to pick on Hobb and her writing, because I think she's literally perfect.
We can talk about her writing and still go, but all of it's there for a reason.
To me, this is one that I almost more put on Hobb than I do on Greg. Yeah. Because Althea is kind of written as the token, I know I was raised this way, but instead I'm going to put on pants and swab the deck. Like, every story has to have this will. Yes, I'll just pretend like I'm a boy and go on a whaling. Like, a lot of stories have this Arya character. Again, not to compare everything to A Song of Ice and Fire, but it's a very it's a typical stereotypical, I'm not a girl, I'm my own woman character to put into a story. And so no one's ever going to live up to her standards, who's a courtly gentleman. And so it kind of sets the courtly gentleman up to be a misogynist, when really he's probably just being a courtly gentleman within the context of their culture.
No,
not that there's
right.
anything, of course, his mindset is incorrect and it's antiquated, and it's proving a point that, you know, change needs to come in the patriarchal society. But also, Althea is a very stereotypically written character in her own way, being she's the cause for change, and she has to be there for the story to make sense. But I almost feel like it's less on Greg and it's more on, he was set up to be that type of character for Althea, this type of character. So I never held it against him, but, you know, he doesn't do much for me.
Well, what's it Althea says? I could never kiss someone who asked permission.
Like,
okay. Yeah. But as you say, but at that point, we've already invested in.
We've invested in her impression. We know what's going to happen.
Yeah. And I actually like the fact that when we left them, they were still kind of working out their relationship, but they were working out how that was going to work. And when we hear about them in Tawnyman, when Jack is catching Beloved up with news, the fact that we hear that Althea is pregnant, that's kind of lovely, because she never thought she would want a child. And it had to have been a deliberate choice, because she had the Wizardwood charm that stopped her being pregnant. So she had to have removed that. So it's a deliberate choice to have a child.
And I love that she was able to realize that you can have a family and you can be a mom and you can still have your ship life.
That's
like, you don't have to fit into a mold to be a family. And I like that.
And we get all so of that context from Althea's pregnant.
Yes, exactly. Because we know it had to be a choice, and her and Brashen made that choice together, and it's just
we're
lovely.
able to infer all of that because we've been shown these characters, and we've been shown their world, and we've been shown how they react.
We know what type of decisions they tend to make. So when they do something big that's not what we would expect from them, we know, like, it must be working out really well for them.
That's right.
And
we can build that ourselves off page, and that's the interactive nature of reading. You know, we've learned about these people, and we can imagine that they're doing things off page. But, speaking of off page, I don't know that I will ever forgive Robin Hobb for killing Patience off page. That I didn't get to grieve for Patience made me really angry. I was like,
and it was strange because it almost did like two chunks. Like, at first you just hear that she passed, and you're like, what, did I read that right? Like, it's not supposed to happen like that. And then later on, I think it's in a B perspective, actually, she kind of tells back what happened, like from like journals or something.
She was like just in her garden, and you're like,
and you're sitting there and you're like, that's such a Patience way to die, by like bossing people around. And but at the same time, I feel like we deserved more, and I feel like Patience deserved more.
Somebody did make the very good point, though, that to have lost Patience and then Molly in quick succession, you wouldn't have grieved properly for Patience anyway, but you also then wouldn't have grieved for Molly with B. So the choice was made we'll grieve for Molly with B. So I get that. I do. I get it. And as a writing choice, it makes sense. As somebody who loves Patience, I'm not okay with that choice.
What a one. I mean, it's crazy to think that, like, I mean, she's a tier 3 character as far as page time goes, but she almost immediately was so unique and lovable, and the way she loved Fitz was so realistic. And she wasn't afraid to say, I don't like you, but I love you, and I don't know what to do with you, but I'm going to keep you. And the fact that she was honest about how she worked through her feelings with him, and how she was never not honest with him, was so
I think the most powerful thing for me about Patience was every action she took not only did not benefit her, they often worked against her, because being there for Fitz was why she was there. It made her more of an oddball. It made her more ostracized, and she didn't care. She was going to be there.
Cared what other people thought.
Going to stand up for Fitz
and do the right thing, and
that won my heart straight away. And then you watch that relationship develop, and then you start to see what it actually really means to Patience. And when they finally have that moment at the beginning of Royal Assassin, where she asks him how his trip was, and he says, I ate some bad food and I had a reaction. And they both know he's lying.
Yeah.
And he has this moment of understanding that Patience knows that he's lying, and that she's had to do this with his father as well. And that they both recognize that we see each other. We actually see each other.
She's like, this isn't my first rodeo. I know what it's like being involved with a Farseer.
Yeah. And I loved that for them. And I loved that when he returns in the Tawny Man and poor Lacey passes out into the marigolds, that sense of affront, that how dare you make me think that you were dead all those years? You're going to tell me right now everything that's happened to you.
When I felt the same way, I was like, how dare you? And like throughout all of Tawny Man, I just could wring his neck the whole time because he had so many opportunities.
Yeah.
And again, we understand at the end that a lot of it is because of his disconnect, because he doesn't have any connection to those memories and emotions and stuff. He's only able to think about it with his head. He's not able to think about it with his heart at all. But there are so many times when like Ketcher would be like, yo, like, we can come out of the closet. Like,
it's okay.
Loves you.
We can
like
do
Burrick
this.
and Molly, like, it's going to be a shock, but they would rather have you alive
in their lives.
And be confused and maybe mad for a little while than not have you at all. Like, I want you to be a part of, I want you to come to court. Like, we want to legitimize you. Like, literally everyone's like, hey, bro, like, here's an opportunity on a silver platter. And he's just like, no. And I'm like, I'm gonna wring your neck.
Yeah.
But that was very satisfying though when he finally gets to have a conversation with Burrick. And
that broke my heart, because initially you get him over.
No, not satisfying, but like you just want it to happen.
Oh god, yeah.
And when it happens, you're just like,
when Burrick shows up at the island and all Fitz can think is everything's okay now.
Yeah, Burrick's here. Yeah,
heart of the pack is here. That initial reaction is wolfish. It's I'm safe. Somebody I can trust implicitly is here. I can let go.
It'll be okay.
Yeah, and that just the beauty of that moment. Just
so good.
Yeah, but then we also get those moments that we get from Nettle's perspective, where when Fitz has to let Burrick know that he's alive and he knows where Swift is and Swift's okay, and he sends the message via Nettle's dreams, and you see through Nettle's eyes the moment that Burrick registers the message and what it means, and the shock and the collapse, and you don't realize what we've done, woman, when Molly's like, what the hell is wrong with you?
Yeah, right.
You know, and he's like, you don't, the horror in himself that, oh my god, I married Fitz's woman and I've betrayed
my son, basically.
And all of those emotions hit him all at once, so
like
hard
relief
that he
and
literally
guilt
collapses.
And anger.
Yeah, and getting that moment was heartbreaking, and everything that happens from there with Burrick was just so beautiful.
It felt like a weight lifted off of your shoulders, but at the same time, it was crushing.
Yes, it was, because you're like, oh God, that meant he's going to have that hurt attached to all of the goodness that he's had in the life that he's formed in the time that Fitz has been away, and that's really devastating. And obviously the way that ends for Burrick is that he doesn't have to spend time with that loss. He can have the moment of connection with Fitz and have closure with that. All very lovely. I did wish the time had been made more obvious that was spent re-courting Molly, because it does take place over a long period of time, but that period of time is in a very short part of the book. So it feels very, oh well, that happened quick.
I feel like she did an adequate job of letting the reader know that they didn't rush back into it, and he spent time building a foundation, and it was their new relationship, and neither of them had any interest in picking up where they left off. Like, this is a new relationship, and because I mean they're both completely different people at this point. Right. So I think that the author did a good job conveying what took place, but I still wish we would have had more time with them.
Yeah.
But I say that about everything. Like, my only complaint about all these books, I wish they were longer, which is crazy because they are like all huge books. Basically, like, even the shortest one is still like almost 400 pages. Yeah. Most people would call that a big book. Like,
that's right.
Like spoiler alert, non-fantasy readers think 400 pages is and I'm like, that's like small to medium size.
Yeah, that's a baby one. That's a really good one. Yeah.
The series that I felt like had the biggest disconnect when it came to a villain was Tawny Man.
Yeah.
And I think it's because we had several little small things that were snubbed out pretty quickly. And then with the Pale Woman, I felt like there was a big lack of development there, which again makes sense because we're only getting it as Fitz is getting it.
Yeah, we don't have the knowledge from Fitz and the Fool.
Yeah, with Fitz and the Fool, you get a whole lot of backstory. But in the moment, I felt like I hate her. Yeah. Like, talk about white hot fury because of the way she touched, treated, spoke to, hurt, killed the Fool.
Beloved, yeah.
Like, you can never ever know anyone who hurts Beloved. Like, I hate them.
Yeah, there's no coming back from that.
So it worked. Trust me. Like, as I was reading it, I was like, I've never hated a villain more. But at the same time, I was like, I wish I had more.
Yeah, which it's not meaty enough to.
But in the moment, it just kind of felt like she's the bad guy. Like, here you go. Yeah. But it's a really big trust the process moment because she gets really well fleshed out in Fitz and the Fool.
That's right.
Through just memories of other people working with her and stuff.
And it adds so much context to why he was tortured the way he was tortured, and made that torture worse in hindsight, because you're like, okay, we saw the physical hurts to Fool and Beloved in those scenes.
I actually love this cover.
It is beautiful, isn't it?
A lot of the tattoos. And when you pick it up, you have no idea
the relevance,
what that means, or who it is, or why it's a dragon, why it's a tattoo, why it's the whole back. And then you read about Eliania, and you're like,
"Whoa,
is that the tattoo?" You know. And so, like, man, the plot really thickens, and so, it's a weird like catch-22 with that villain, because on one hand, it doesn't feel quite fleshed out enough, but you have to just remind yourself that you're just getting the information as Fitz is getting it, and he's only partially involved in anything that has anything to do with her. But at the same time, you know what she did to Beloved, and that's enough. That's enough. I've never encountered
the horror that she put Beloved through is awful in Fool's Fate. I mean, it's awful to read. And then when you read through all of Fitz and the Fool, and you get the reasons why those were the methods, it makes it so much worse, because now you're emotionally tortured as well as only physically. And the evil incarnate at that point, you're just like, oh my God, she should have suffered more. She should have suffered more, Fitz. Come on.
And that's something that really irritated me, was the way he kind of just knew she was going to die.
Yeah. I actually still like that, because for him, it was a moment of power. Like, no, I'm choosing not to do what you expect me to, because that gives you power. And I liked that, and works with the way we later find out Claire operates. Yeah, the more outrageous.
Well, and honestly, it wouldn't have. Fitz wouldn't have gained anything. It would have caused him more damage and more baggage to carry around. If he had tortured her to death, that wouldn't have sat well with him. So I get it, but just like, I want that woman to feel horrible things.
I wanted her to suffer.
And she ruined so many lives. Like, forget about what she did to the Fool. Like, she ruined
all
so
of the
many
Outlanders that she took and she tortured, and
for decades. And think about the way she completely. I know that they've been raiders as a people for a long time, but she really took that to the next level.
That's right.
And she ruined their reputation. It's going to take them a century to outgrow that reputation. Like, again,
and she was deliberately trying to make that worse.
Yes.
In the way that they had manufactured this test for dutiful, and you see Fitz finally working out all of the repercussions.
All the repercussions.
And you're like, oh God, yeah, this is actually a really bad idea. Panic. But again, with hindsight of everything you get in Fitz in the Fall, it takes on an even deeper meaning when you realize that it's Clarice that wants that. It's Clarice that wants that disconnect. It's Clarice that wants that break in trade, wants an ongoing war, wants cost.
It's so
the context it brings is insane to a reread. And for Fitz and the Fall to be both, what was it somebody said to me? Oh, it's just total fan service. And I was like, no, it's not. Because not only are we getting all of this context for the previous subsets, we're also getting Fitz's view on what all of the work he and Fall have done, what that's meant to the world. Without Fitz existing, none of these things would have happened. None of them. We wouldn't have had anything in the live ship traders because the war would have continued. Bingtown wouldn't be undergoing regrowth with new traders, and because now the economy's working because the war is over, we had everything occur in live ships. Without Fitz and the Fallen Tawny Man, you wouldn't have found Icefire. We wouldn't have had the insight to dragon culture at all. We wouldn't have had him yet again upend all of their prophecies and hard reset them. And we wouldn't have had, because of Icefire and Tintaglia, new dragons to be hatched on Others Island to bring about the next generation. We just wouldn't have had anything in Ray Milds and in live ships. So the fact that he gets to visit those people and see the impact that his choices as catalyst is powerful. You know, none of these people would be where they are.
Yeah, I don't call that fan service at all. That's just him seeing the ripple effect of him being the catalyst and the Fool clinging to the dreams that lined out to the
being
path.
Able to see. We brought dragons back. And we brought dragons back. And now there are Elderlings. We've literally brought a species back from extinction. And we've brought a people into existence who live so long that they're going to bring learning and education and skill of a much greater level to the world than what was possible before, because they're so long lived. And that literally came about because Fitz was born. Yay, the Fall.
Well, it's just a great picture to show that, like, this is why it's important to protect species and things like that, because of the ripple effect. If you can't take out something that you find to be a predator or something that's like,
inconvenient to farming.
It's important to have that balance in the world, because otherwise what you get is a world where 100 years down the road, who knows what Clarice would have looked like and how it would have taken over the world and how their vision, like, you need balance. And like, just that I love that little bit about, I can't remember the town name, but they go through the portal stone and it's that town where everything is just dead and dreary and all the violence and the everything there is just bad. And it's and you find out that's the portal stone that the Elderlings were escaping through, and they were just killing them as they came through the stone. Yeah. So it is that ground is soaked in memories and bloodshed of terror and surprise and horror and fear and grief, and it's seeped into the very being of that place. And like, how long would it have taken for the whole world to feel like that? Because if Clarice starts thinking, okay, we got rid of dragons, we got rid of Elderlings, like, what if we got rid of all the poor people? And then what if we got rid of all the royals that were trying to control us? And then what if we was just us? Like, what if we were the only power left? Right. So it's just a great example of balance and why it's so important, and why you can't take the reins. You got to let things happen. But when you get too much power, and you can see the future, like you got to use that power for good. So
yeah, it's that checks and balances thing. You know, somebody said that really bringing dragons back is an evil thing. I mean, they're dragons, they kill things. I'm like, yeah, but so do people.
Yeah,
and by bringing dragons back, you remind humans that we can't overstep, because we piss off the dragons, they eat us.
Yes. And the also you have to be respectful of the cycle of life.
And the dragons have learned, because of the only dragons left now are Tintaglia and Icefire, who both needed badly human assistance to exist, and all of the serpents who needed humans to enable them to even form a cocoon, helped them form cocoons, enabled them to be alive. Humans again took the survivors and led them to somewhere they could become healthy, become strong, become dragons. Every dragon in existence now has memory of humans as being necessary to their existence.
Necessary for existence.
All of those dragons are then going to share all of those memories with all of the new
offspring. Yeah. And so, like, so you do hope that, like, maybe
between the two is different now.
Yes. And so you do think that maybe going forward, there's going to be a healthier relationship between dragons and humans. And again, they're not pets, they're not our friends, they're not companions, we're not even allies. But as long as there's a good mutual respect that like we're here because you and you're here because of us, like that's mutual respect, and that's how societies move
either
forward.
One of them from trying to overwhelm anything. Like it's the checks and balances. Like, no, we're all allowed to exist, and we all have rights to.
Yes, we all have our own domains.
Yeah. And so not only is it this just beautiful, soul deep love story, it's a story of ecological balance, and it's a story of goodness, redemption, and empathy, and compassion, and
and also justice. Justice. Like the people who deserved to have bad things happen to them, it happens to them. And oh man, I hope that what was his friend, the other white prophet whose skin is all black now, I can't remember his name. I hope that he's able to continue the legacy and because again, I don't think this organization was always evil. No. I think it was there. Again, you don't want to wipe out everybody, because their organization and their purpose they serve in the world still needs to exist. For a reason. Yeah. It was formed for a reason, but now that it's been humbled and annihilated, maybe they can take the founding principles and still continue the tradition, because again, like, you can't wipe dragons completely out of the world. You see what happens. Like, it needs to be balanced, but hopefully it's like a major lesson learned, because like they nearly, like I said, I doubt another generation would pass before things started getting real messy at Claris, and they started trying to take over the whole world. They clearly are.
They were getting close. That was the point. Yeah, they were getting close. Funny.
The only thing that to me felt that was inconsistent, but a question I have is like, why is Claris so unknown to the rest of the world? It's like there were tons of people that seemed to be coming and going, like to have their future told, but any other major city outside of Claris, people act like they'd never heard of it. Like all the traders, all the captains, all the these worldly people, it seems like they're like, never heard of it. I just thought that was just kind of weird.
But then they've had whites like Vandalia who were fogging people's minds. So who's to say that wasn't just an automatic thing? Anybody leaving the region,
that's totally true,
was going to be fogged about it. Yeah, you went somewhere and you made some money. It was this little trading village.
That's true. It's a good point.
So, and they were very insular. When you got to Claris, it was a very insular little town. They knew strangers. They were like, you're new. And the people who visited for fortunes were very regulated. They stayed in this inn. They got shuffled across to get their fortunes told.
That's true.
They were very
guarded. It seemed like such a majestic,
but it is so huge
fortress. you think there would be like lore and legends, and even if it's misinformation, you think everyone would be like, oh, I've heard of it, but only in legends and stuff.
Well, and you see Paragon knew where it was as a ship. He's been there before as a ship, but there's no knowledge of it in Bintown. So the initial Ludlocks that went to Claris obviously didn't retain the memory of having been there for word to get through. So this is it's one of the times where I'm like, this is my advantage to having read it a lot, in that I've asked myself these questions and I've found the answers as I've gone, because I've been looking for those answers the next time. And the fact that I have been able to find answers for the questions as I think about them is, to me, an absolute just piece of talent and skill I have not seen anywhere else.
I know. I keep saying, I'm like, I'm not ready to say, again, I've read it once and it's still so fresh. So when something is really fresh,
revisit it at the moment. It's
and I'm not ready to rank it yet, because right now I'm like, nothing's better, everything is the best thing ever. But like, you have to understand, like, I'm still on the high, but I feel like I can confidently say that as far as completed series goes, it's the best thing I've ever read. As far as a full beginning to end, full circle, payoff, resolution, beautifully, masterfully compiled, with no stone left unturned, no big question marks left at the end. I've never read anything better, ever.
No, it's an incredibly satisfying read if you're willing to just take it in and go, okay, I'm not going to question, I'm just going to take it in.
Yes.
And let the story
it's a very definition of trust the process.
Yeah.
But the great thing is sometimes when people say trust the process, what they're really saying is it doesn't get good till the end. And that's not the case here.
Yes, that's right.
That's not the case here. It's good the whole time, but the brilliance doesn't completely unravel until you have the whole picture.
That's right.
And like I said, it's been over 2 weeks and I still can't get over it. I can't stop thinking about it. I can't stop making different connections and going, oh my gosh, she did that too.
Yeah.
I'll have to send you a picture when I'm finished of, okay, so we were leaving on a road trip for Ohio, and I was at like the 85% of Assassin's Fate, which sounds like I'm almost at the very end, but when it's a 900-page book, that's still a pretty big chunk.
A lot to go.
But I was like, and it was like 10 p.m. and I'm like, I don't want to read this in the car because I have a feeling I'm going to cry.
A lot.
So I was like, I committed. I was like, I'm going to sit here on the couch and I'm going to just do it. I'm going to read out. I'm like, I'm going to Ohio tomorrow. If I want to sleep in the car, I can sleep in the car. Who cares? I'm going to stay up all night. Yeah. And I didn't. I think I was done by like 12:30 or something. When I say I cried, I have never cried like that reading a book before. Now, I've cried reading books before. I'm a book crier. Like, it doesn't take much to get some tears out of me. I was heaving sobs.
I find that I'm rocking. I've had to put the book down and just let myself cry.
The next day, my lower and upper eyelids were so swollen from sobbing that I could barely even keep my eyes open. And I was like numb. Like, my husband was like, are you okay? And I'm like, I don't even know what, like, because yes, there were things that made me super sad. But part of it was just being relieved or being happy, like or being
just like,
yes. And like I said, just the release of, like I said, I think just the weight of really experiencing everything Verity went through from Fitz's perspective was heavier than I thought it was going to be. But having to watch that disconnect during the last days between Fitz and Beloved was too hard, because the fool finally thought that he was able to give Fitz what he was asking for.
Yeah.
But what all he needed was for him to join him. Like, they needed that was
beautiful. And all that needed
it's frustrating
was
for B, because she's like, and B is like, you're supposed to be Beloved. like, why aren't you helping him?
Yeah.
And he's like sitting there going, all I want to do is to die with him. All I want to do is to bury myself with him and become one. All I want to. He can't even tell her that because he's trying to be like, well, I'm your dad now. Like,
yeah, I'm here to look after you and love you. And
it's that final miscommunication when each person thinks that they're the one making the sacrifice to give the other one what they need in those final moments. But really all they needed was each other. And I said my only regret for that final scene with the two of them is I wish that they could have had one more conversation between the two of them. But Fitz was so far gone at that point that it wouldn't have meant anything.
But it was unnecessary. Everything
it's already been said.
And
but like from my perspective, like I wanted one more.
I wanted.
Our soulmates would love each other. I wanted it to never end.
I did,
but
although I did
like the whole thing with him pouring his memories into Stone Wolf as he's telling Bee his story.
Yeah.
The moment when everyone joins him.
Yeah.
And Ketrigan's there. I mean, I think I started crying. I started crying right when Fitz realizes that the parasites aren't just from eating raw meat, and
they actually did get me. And
when it finally connects to him, he's like, "Oh, the dark." Like that's the same parasites that the one chick had.
Yeah,
like when he finally realizes, like, "Oh, this is a time bomb."
Yeah,
that's when my tears started. Yeah, and I did not stop crying until about an hour after I stopped reading it,
because we get there's so much in there that's just so beautiful, because
there's so many he ties it up with each person so well.
I mean, we talked about Bee having 4 parents. There's for all that I fundamentally just adore the soul deep love story that we get with Fitz and Beloved, there is always still a part of me that shipped him with Ketrigan, always.
Yeah.
So when at the end we leave with Bee in the care of Ketrigan, who has given the throne to her son, so she can now live in the mountains with Bee as a mother figure to a child of Fitz's. I was just like,
and the fact that
she
Night Eyes comes, and the fact that she tells Fitz, like, I was witted and I had a connection with Night Eyes, and then it's this moment where you realize that she loved Fitz, but her real soul connection was with Night Eyes.
Yeah,
and it's not weird.
Really,
it's not weird though, because Night Eyes was part of Fitz. Like from the moment that her and Fitz really connected from like Assassin's Quest 4, they always had a special friendship. But from Assassin's Quest forward, it was Night Eyes that really tied their bond.
Loved Ketrigan.
Night Eyes loved it. And when he says, like, this is the mate that I would have chosen.
I was like, see, I knew you were the brains. I knew it.
Yes, and I mean, all this. Ketrigan had so many like payoff moments.
She really did.
Like with the fox pen, and then in Fool's Quest when she has the moment where she thinks she's possibly telling him goodbye because she knows that he's going on this quest that he may not return from, and she has that opportunity to thank him for her son.
Yeah. And we get the realization that
I always wondered if she knew, and she did, but it didn't change anything for her.
No, like she knew it was just the body, and it wasn't.
It was chivalry's son. I mean, sorry,
but still thanking him, because without him,
thanking him that like, and just
had his son.
She knew that like he knows, and he's always wondered if I knew, and we don't need to talk about it, but I want to let him know that I appreciate once again a sacrifice he made. Again, not that like sleeping with Ketrigan is a huge sacrifice, but but
it was a sacrifice of the ownership of his body. That's a big deal.
And also to know that he has a son that he's not able to raise as his own. Like that's a sacrifice.
Yeah.
And the whole concept of sacrifice,
and that she always from very early on acknowledged that Fitz was sacrifice, and everything he was doing was sacrifice.
Embodied it, and she was so consistent throughout the entire series of being that perfect monarch in my mind.
She was
being it's that mixture of appreciating and taking the good from a Six Duchies style monarchy, along with what she loved and respected and cherished from her own culture, and amalgamizing them into being the perfect monarch.
Yeah,
and of course, she made mistakes. She's human,
to make it better, always.
But she's thinking like a truly forward-thinking, like future-oriented, but also peace-oriented ruler. And I loved that it felt like Eliana and Dutiful were able to mimic that by saying, let's take what's great about your culture and great about my culture. And there's going to be disagreements and frustrations and our heads are going to butt, but you can take the best out of two things and make them something really cool.
Yeah.
And they've now managed to, between the Out Islands and Mountain Kingdom and Six Duchies, make this like really special.
Yeah.
Like
they're doing,
it's not like it's just.
They're sacrificing. Really they are doing constantly their best to improve things, knowing that we're not going to get it perfect, that we might not get every area of the country working this well, but we're still going to try.
If you can make any change, if you can make any change for the better, any shift that's going to stick, then it's worth the sacrifice.
That's right. And they're all working toward it, and it's beautiful to know that that's all a result of Fitz's existence. He's literally changed the course of all of it. And for the ending to be where it was, where we see Bee in the company of Kettricken, you know that she's going to be cared for and treasured for who she is,
and strong,
while being challenged and while being expected to do what she can.
It's such a great place for her to end up, because I believe that Kettricken will let her be a kid, and she's gonna let her be weird because she's the fool's daughter, like
every facet of this child will be loved.
Frustrated me too was that, like, again, I know it's a very unnatural, unheard of concept, but the whole time that he's raising her, I'm like, oh, she ages very slowly, and she's
like, I'm
like, who else do you know
come on,
that shared a body with you that is like that? I was like, hello, Dad. I'm trying to think of anything else I just really had to talk about, but
well, I just like that we got some little hints throughout the end of Fitz in the Fall and Bee's dream journal about the Wolf of the West, and when we get Fitz carving his wolf, I'm like, the threads are there. If Robin Hobb continues writing in the world, the threads are there. It will make sense. It won't feel like it's come out of nowhere. And that we get the sense, because we end with Kettricken smiling because something's following them. And you're like,
that final
there's
line,
a potential for
so
more.
Good.
And I'm like, okay, I don't have to be utterly heartbroken that it's finished. I can hang on to
I know that he lives on
more story that just hasn't been told yet. So
well, and I feel like too, like he knew, like if you compare the knowledge that he went into making Stone Dragon, the amount of practical information that he went into the situation with compared to what Verity knew.
That's right.
I feel like Stone Dragon is going to be able to be a much more animated and alive being because they had so much more information going into it.
Because Verity different kind of was power.
Guessing.
Verity was skilled. He wasn't witted. So when we get to the fact that we've got Night Eyes, Fitz, and Beloved in Stone Wolf, we also have the wit, we have the skill, and we have this blood soul bond with all of the elements. So we don't know what that's going to look like in the body of Stone Wolf, and there's stuff to play with there.
Yes, and like I said, if she wants to keep writing in Realm of the Elderlings, I would read it all. But if this is all we get, it's so satisfying because it lets you continue to use your imagination and have all these scenarios where, like you said, what Bee's life is going to look like. What it's going to look like for Nettle and Riddle. And by the way, unsung hero, MVP of the story is Riddle, as far as I'm concerned.
Dude.
Like, that guy came through time
Every
after time. Like, that is the guy you want your daughter to marry. So I was very happy for that.
Yeah.
And the fact that they named her Hope, like, that made me cry.
I mean, it's
too.
just such a beautiful name.
Like, when Fitz finds out that he's a grandfather, like, so good. When in Fool's Quest, when Chade gets to have his goodbye talk with Fitz, that was another moment that had me like blubbering when he said that he was Verity's best mistake he ever made.
And
I love the way they developed that moment back
for Fitz, where he stops being Fitz for that moment, and you get Shade's boy wept.
Shade's boy wept. Yeah, and I was like, this girl wept too.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, I just the whole series just, it never stopped surprising me at what she could do with these characters. And I've never read anything before that's literally written in first person retrospective
that can do
that makes you feel so connected to everyone. Like, how did she do that?
I don't know, but she really did, because they were all three-dimensional characters. They all existed outside of Fitz's point of view, and you know that. It's like, yeah, they totally were having lives out there on their own. They were never just somebody who appeared on the page and you never saw again. Even if they only appeared on the page and you never saw them again, you know, and then
the ones that were kind of in and out quickly, like some of the the witted characters and stuff, they always came back in and plugged back in a way that wasn't just like convenience, but you're like, well, it would make sense that that person would be right there and then, and that's why we left them there, and so good.
But however long it's been since we last saw them, I absolutely get the sense that they've been and done other things. That they aren't the same person that we left way back when. They've evolved as well, and the talent that goes into that just continues to astonish me, even after all of these reads.
I can't wait. I know we keep saying it, but I cannot wait to eventually read it again, because I already know that the experience is going to be completely different with this 2020 point of view. But at the same time, I don't think it's going to be any less magical, impressive, and enjoyable.
Well, I mean, I've been brought to tears several times, and I have literally read this series 20 odd times. So it loses none of its impact. It loses none of its emotional heft, even knowing what's coming, where the really sad moments are, where the really powerful moments are. If anything, it makes them more impactful. I know that we spoke at the beginning about chapter 26. In Fool's Errand, I'm normally crying by chapter 22 because I know it's coming. And by the time
all the little things, all the little things that you may not appreciate the first time around because it's just a sentence to get you to the next sentence, you're able to go, oh, that sentence is pointing towards what I know is coming, and I didn't even see it the first time.
And so yes, this series more than holds up. It strengthens itself all the time.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's.
And I always hate to be that person who's like, well, wait till a reread. But this is one that I'm like, I understand why people, I understand why they push the reread, not push it, but they're talking about rereads. And you're like, oh, I'm on book 2. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just
certainly encouraged. It's, I mean, you have read through, you know how much information that you've gathered over the series just itself. You know that already you've recontextualized some of the things that you've read before. Going back and actually reading them again and seeing how much of it was on page that you just didn't know was part of this greater story. It is like reading a new story, because you're reading it with full context, with full color, with 3D glasses on. You're seeing the whole picture, not just what's in front of you. And it's a remarkable experience, because not very many books can do that. Really.
Agreed. Well, as I'm saying, I've never had it happen to me before. Like, I've read some great series that were really well put together, that impressed the socks off of me with all the, the resolution and the, seeing threads come together. It's happened before, but never on this scale, and never, most of the time I'm left still with questions.
Yeah.
And I really, there's some things that maybe I would like to know more about just because of curiosity, but not because she started something and didn't finish it.
No.
I see that happening a lot, to where you go, yeah, you told the story, but what about all these other things you set up and then kind of let fizzle out? That frustrates me, and that never happened. That never happened.
Everything got to a point where you were satisfied where that thread ended. And I say that like it ended. You're satisfied with where they are at that moment. Because you still are left with the sense that these people have continued on. They're dealing with what just happened. But you had resolution of the things that were in the story. And you can't ask for more than that from a writer. And to be given not just that, but so much more is a gift to readers. It really is.
Yeah.
So
now this is something that it's not a recommendation I make lightly, because if I make this recommendation with somebody, I want to sit down and have at least a short conversation with them and go, if you're going to start this, I really want to know that you're going to finish it. And it's okay if it takes you 5 years or whatever. Like, no one's telling you to rush it.
Absolutely. This is an entire life story. There's time.
Yeah. With Farseer, because I wasn't as invested, again, I liked the books very much. I thought they were well written. I enjoyed what was being set up, but it did kind of feel like ideas that were forming with no real shape yet, because that's what they are.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't fully invested, but I'm glad that Scot really, I would say pushed, but he wasn't pushy, of course, but he really pushed live ship for me, because he said, I know enough about your personal preferences at this point that I have no doubt that you are going to love live ship traders. He goes, you may not want to continue, you may not like the rest, which I did, but he said, but if that's the last thing you read by Robin Hobb, you're going to love it. And I was like, well, sure, like, because I never intended on quitting. But sure enough, I picked it up and was kind of planning on, loosely doing a book a month.
Yeah.
And I read all 3 in 2 weeks, because it's one story. It's one story divided up into 3 volumes, and I just couldn't stop. So really happy. And everyone who's reading it right now, I mean, I think there's 5 or 6 of them right now who are between Ship of Magic and Mad Ship, they're really making progress, and everyone's enjoying it. And I'm just like, okay, now we're going.
It's the best feeling. It really is. I'm always excited because I'm a reader. I know how awesome it is to read something that is genuinely enthralling, that pulls you in and makes you want to read more. And as a reader, I want that for other readers. It's like, I want you to feel this joy. I want you to get this pleasure from this series. So it's so exciting for me when I hear people are picking them up. And it's why I'm in so many Hobb threads, and it's why I invite myself to so many Hobb conversations. It's like, no, I like hearing the joy. I like knowing that I'm part of spreading this to new readers.
Yes.
Because it's worth reading. It's
nice to have an affirmation to go, okay, like, it is that good. Like, it's not just me. Like, I'm not just weirdly infatuated with this niche thing.
I mean, I am, but it's not just
good.
that.
But I love when more people read it and they have the same experience or their own experience, but like they're just as passionate about it. And you're like, okay, it wasn't just me. Like, this really is that good.
That's right. It's so satisfying.
That's a perfect word for it. Very satisfying.
So I think on that note, we've probably covered as much as we need to in this conversation.
Oh yeah, we could probably talk for another 7 hours, but
easily.
That about
having said that, though, the invitation now remains open. You are in the Hobb Club. You are welcome to come and chat Hobb on my channel, so that you don't fill your own with just Hobb. And because, hey, it's easy to do. There's enough to talk about. And I have a semi-regular discussion with Evie that you are more than welcome to join, because more fangirls of
shoot me the invite, because
welcome.
I love doing this kind of stuff. So thank you for having me. And I just love talking about Robin Hobb. It's my new favorite thing.
Absolutely. Alrighty. Well, with that, we're going to love you and leave you. Like, subscribe, do the things that help the algorithm find more new readers. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.